January 24th, 1968. The Pentagon. 48 hours after North Korean gunboats forced USS Pueblo to surrender in international waters, United States Navy intelligence analysts gathered in a secure briefing room 3 levels below ground. On the wall-mounted screens, satellite imagery showed something they had never seen before. Soviet Pacific Fleet activity had surged. Destroyers sortied from Vladivostok. Submarines departed their pens. Intelligence-gathering trawlers repositioned themselves along key transit routes. But these vessels were not searching for anything. They were watching, waiting. The analysts understood what was happening. For 20 years, American intelligence ships and submarines had operated in a precarious equilibrium with Soviet forces. There had been rules, unwritten, unspoken, but understood. You could follow, you could observe, you could collect signals intelligence from international waters, but you did not seize, you did not capture, you did not fire. North Korea had just shattered that equilibrium, and now Soviet naval commanders were calculating whether the precedent applied to them. Commander Lloyd Bucker and 82 American sailors were prisoners in Wonsan. 10 encryption machines and thousands of classified documents were in North Korean hands. The intelligence loss was catastrophic. The Soviet Union had gained an estimated 3 to 5 years of advantage in communications technology from a single captured vessel. But the strategic implications ran deeper than technology. Every American intelligence ship now operating off communist coastlines had become a potential target. Every submarine conducting surveillance in contested waters faced new risks. The invisible rules that had prevented capture and bloodshed throughout the Cold War had been rewritten in a single violent afternoon. USS Pueblo had been designed as part of Operation Clickbeetle, a joint Navy and National Security Agency program that converted aging cargo vessels into electronic intelligence collectors. These ships, small, slow, minimally armed, operated under the theory that their unassuming appearance and adherence to international law would protect them. The concept had worked for years. USS Banner, Pueblo's sister ship, had completed 15 missions against Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean targets between 1965 and 1968. Soviet vessels had harassed Banner repeatedly. They blocked her path. They trained fire control radars on her hull. They signaled warnings. On May 24, 1966, a Soviet SIGINT ship deliberately collided with Banner off Vladivostok, attempting to force her away. But no one had opened fire. No one had boarded. No one had seized the vessel and imprisoned the crew. Pueblo's capture changed everything. It demonstrated that a small nation could strike an American intelligence platform with impunity. It revealed that the United States would not immediately retaliate with military force, even when international law had been blatantly violated. And it showed that the intelligence windfall from capturing a signals intelligence ship was worth whatever diplomatic consequences might follow. Soviet naval commanders took note. If North Korea could seize an American spy ship without triggering war, what was stopping Soviet forces from employing similar tactics? The answer, in early 1968, was unclear, and that uncertainty created a crisis more dangerous than most Americans realized. USS Enterprise, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, had been in Pearl Harbor preparing for an operational readiness inspection when news of Pueblo's capture arrived. Within 48 hours, the inspection was cancelled. Enterprise was ordered to proceed at maximum speed to Sasebo, Japan, the last port Pueblo had departed before beginning her fatal mission. The carrier battle group would form the centerpiece of Operation Formation Star, the largest concentration of American naval power near the Korean peninsula since the armistice 15 years earlier. Captain Kent Lee, Enterprise's commanding officer, brought his ship through a storm so severe it forced them to reduce speed to 6 knots and arrive 24 hours behind schedule. By January 25, 1968, Enterprise had transited through Tsushima Strait into the Sea of Japan. She was accompanied by the nuclear-powered guided missile frigate Truxtun and guided missile frigate Halsey. As the task force entered the strait, a Soviet Riga-class frigate, and an oiler were already stationed at the entrance, monitoring their passage. Hours later, a Kashin-class destroyer began trailing the American formation. Then a Kotling-class destroyer joined. Then more. By February 5, 1968, a picket line of Soviet warships had formed along the 38th parallel, 2 Kinder-class cruisers and 3 Kashin-class destroyers. 6 more Soviet destroyers steamed into the Sea of Japan. At least 2 Soviet submarines operated beneath the surface, their positions unknown. Admiral Nikolai Amelko, commander of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, had committed half of his cruiser-destroyer forces to monitor the American presence. Soviet naval aviation flew multiple daily maritime patrol missions, their Tu-16 bombers photographing American ships, recording their electronic signatures, tracking their movements. The United States had deployed overwhelming force to the Sea of Japan, not to rescue Pueblo's crew, who were already imprisoned ashore, but to demonstrate resolve and prevent further North Korean aggression. The show of force had an unintended consequence. It concentrated American and Soviet naval power in a confined body of water during a period of extraordinary tension. Every interaction carried the potential for miscalculation. Every close approach risked collision. Every radar lock could be interpreted as hostile intent. On January 23, 1968, the same day Pueblo was seized, a Soviet intelligence-gathering vessel, designated Gidrofon, repeatedly crossed the bow of Enterprise as the carrier departed Sasebo. Enterprise was forced to stop engines and reverse thrust to avoid collision. Throughout Operation Formation Star, Soviet trawlers and warships employed similar tactics, positioning themselves directly in the path of American vessels, forcing evasive maneuvers, demonstrating that they could disrupt operations without firing a shot. The harassment was deliberate, coordinated, and more aggressive than anything American commanders had experienced in previous operations. Vice Admiral Edwin Hooper, who had served as Commander Service Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet, until November 1967, knew the history of these intelligence collection ships intimately. He had overseen the Aegir program's development, copying Soviet practices of using small electronic collecting vessels for signals intelligence. When word reached him at a dinner party on January 23rd that Pueblo had been captured, his first thought was disbelief. How the hell could this have happened? These ships had explicit instructions to remain in international waters. Pueblo had been following those orders. The North Koreans and Chinese had a pattern of harassing American vessels, cutting across bows, forcing collision courses, holding position until the last moment. But it had always been bluster. The communist powers would not actually attack if you maintained position and held your legal rights. That was the understanding. That was the rule. Pueblo's capture revealed that understanding to be fatally flawed. North Korea had seized an American vessel in international waters, killed a sailor, and imprisoned the crew. The United States had not retaliated. The precedent was set. And now, American intelligence operations faced a choice that had not existed before January 23rd. Continue surveillance missions under the old assumptions and risk more captures, or fundamentally alter how intelligence was gathered, accepting reduced capability in exchange for reduced risk. The Navy chose neither option. Instead, they chose defiance. USS Banner was immediately ordered back to the Sea of Japan. The objective was explicit: reassert the right to conduct intelligence operations in international waters. If Banner retreated, if the intelligence collection program was abandoned, North Korea's attack would have achieved its strategic goal. Every signal intelligence ship worldwide would become a target. Every submarine conducting surveillance would face capture attempts. The precedent would spread from the Sea of Japan to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, the Arctic. Anywhere American intelligence platforms operated near communist territory would become a hunting ground. Banner departed Yokosuka on January 31, 1968, and joined Task Force 71, operating off the North Korean coast. Unlike Pueblo's solo mission, Banner operated with direct protection. A surface action group consisting of the heavy cruiser Canberra and destroyers Osborne and Higbee provided escort, maintaining anti-submarine coverage in the immediate vicinity. The command structure was tightened. Banner reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff through Admiral Ulysses S. Grant Sharp, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Command. There would be no ambiguity about authorization for response. There would be no delays in air support. If North Korean forces approached Banner with hostile intent, American destroyers would intervene immediately. Banner's crew knew they were targets. They knew that somewhere in Wonsan, Commander Buka and his sailors were enduring interrogation and abuse. They knew their ship carried the same encryption equipment, the same classified materials, the same intelligence value that made Pueblo worth capturing. Every radar contact was a potential threat. Every North Korean patrol boat could be preparing an attack run. The mission was no longer just intelligence collection. It was a test. Would the United States maintain its presence despite the danger? Or would fear of capture drive American ships from contested waters? Below the surface, an even more dangerous dimension of the crisis was unfolding. Of the 17 United States submarines, then deployed in the Far East, 9 were ordered to redeploy to the Sea of Japan on January 27, 1968. Nuclear attack submarines and diesel-electric boats converged on Korean waters. Their missions varied. Some provided reconnaissance, photographing North Korean naval facilities and troop movements. Others established defensive screens, positioned to intercept any North Korean surface or submarine threat to American carriers. And several conducted offensive intelligence operations, trailing Soviet submarines, recording their acoustic signatures, gathering data on their capabilities and patrol patterns. Soviet submarines were conducting parallel operations. They monitored American carrier movements. They established surveillance zones along transit routes. They tracked American submarines attempting to follow Soviet vessels. The Sea of Japan became a three-dimensional chess match played at crushing depths, where the pieces were billion-dollar war machines commanded by men trained to hunt and kill, operating under rules of engagement that had just been thrown into chaos by Pueblo's capture. The underwater operations were fraught with peril. Nuclear submarines maneuvered within hundreds of yards of each other, their commanders relying on sonar operators to maintain situational awareness in an environment where visibility was zero and sound was the only sense that mattered. Every course change by a Soviet boat required instant analysis. Was it routine patrol activity or preparation for attack? Every increase in propeller noise demanded interpretation. Was it acceleration to escape or acceleration to ram? Every weapon's door that opened sent hearts racing as crews calculated whether they had seconds to respond or were merely hearing a routine drill. The United States submarine force had operated against Soviet targets for 2 decades without a single incident resulting in capture or sinking. That record was maintained through exceptional skill, rigorous training, and a mutual understanding that neither side would escalate surveillance operations into combat. Both superpowers conducted aggressive intelligence gathering. Both operated inside the other's training areas. Both knew they were being followed, tracked, recorded. The game was accepted. The rules were clear. You could follow as close as courage allowed. You could collect every scrap of intelligence your senses could gather. But you did not attack. You did not capture. You did not kill. Now those rules were in question. If intelligence ships could be seized at gunpoint in international waters, what prevented submarine operations from escalating to similar confrontations? The scenarios were nightmare fuel for naval commanders. An American submarine trailing a Soviet ballistic missile boat too aggressively. The Soviet captain, emboldened by Pueblo's precedent, deciding to depth charge the American vessel to force it away. The American commander, facing attack, launching torpedoes in self-defense. 2 nuclear powers at war because of a tactical decision made at 300 feet below the surface by men who could not communicate with their governments, who had seconds to decide, who understood that one mistake could trigger Armageddon. The crew of USS Pueblo experienced what no American intelligence personnel had endured since the Korean War ended 15 years earlier. Commander Buka and 82 men were transported to Pyongyang, blindfolded and bound, their hands tied so tightly circulation was cut off. They were placed in a facility the sailors would later call the barn, where interrogation began immediately. The North Koreans separated Buka from his crew, isolating him in solitary confinement. The enlisted men and junior officers were quartered 3 or 4 to a room. Guards informed them they were criminals. War criminals. Spies caught in territorial waters conducting illegal espionage. The punishment for such crimes, they were told, was death. The interrogations were methodical. Electronics experts questioned the cryptographic technicians, revealing knowledge that shocked the Americans. When crew members attempted to withhold details or provide false information, interrogators produced pages from captured technical manuals and told them to correct their accounts. The North Koreans had seized everything: the encryption machines, the key lists for January, February, and March, technical documentation explaining how American communications systems functioned, crew personnel records showing exactly who held what clearances and performed which duties. The intelligence windfall was staggering. Soviet specialists arrived within days, gaining access to equipment and documents that would save them years of research and development effort. But the North Koreans wanted more than technical data. They wanted confessions, propaganda victories, statements from American military personnel admitting to violating sovereign territory, conducting espionage, committing aggression. When crew members refused, the beatings began. Men were struck with fists, kicked, prodded with bayonets. Some were forced into stress positions for hours, sitting with legs extended, arms bound behind backs, circulation cut off, muscles screaming in pain. Others endured what would later be documented as torture, systematic physical abuse designed to break resistance and force compliance. The treatment varied in intensity. During the first 3 weeks, and again later in the summer, violence escalated dramatically. Between these periods, conditions improved slightly. Better food, reduced beatings, medical attention for the severely injured. The North Koreans were calibrating their approach, applying enough pressure to secure cooperation, while ensuring the prisoners remained alive for eventual propaganda use. Some crew members endured more torture than others before signing forced confessions. The North Koreans understood that different men broke at different thresholds. They exploited this methodically. Commander Buka faced impossible choices. His crew was being beaten. Men were injured. One sailor, Fireman Dwayne Hodges, had died during the capture from a 57mm cannon round. The surviving crew members depended on him to protect them. But how? He had no leverage, no bargaining position, no rescue was coming. The United States government was negotiating, but those negotiations would take months. His men were suffering now. The code of conduct governing prisoner resistance to enemy interrogation technically applied, but the reality was more complicated. The North Koreans possessed personnel files and classified documents detailing every aspect of Pueblo's mission. Strict adherence to the code was impossible when the enemy already knew everything. Buka eventually signed a confession. He worded it carefully, including phrases that were obviously coerced. In his statement, he expressed his fervent desire to pay in the Korean People's Army, deliberately pronouncing paean as peon during the filmed confession. The North Koreans did not understand the insult. Later, during staged propaganda photographs, crew members gave the middle finger to cameras, claiming it was a Hawaiian gesture for good luck. For months, North Korean propaganda featured Americans supposedly expressing gratitude while actually displaying obscene gestures. When authorities eventually discovered the deception, beatings resumed for a solid week. Back in the Sea of Japan, Operation Formation Star continued. USS Banner had returned to the contested waters, protected by destroyers and aware that her mission was now fundamentally different. She was not just collecting intelligence, she was demonstrating American resolve, proving that one successful capture would not drive intelligence ships from international waters. The crew understood they were targets. Every radar contact was assessed for hostile intent. Every North Korean patrol boat was tracked meticulously. The destroyer escorts maintained anti-submarine coverage. their sonar operators searching for underwater threats. Below the surface, the submarine dimension of the crisis intensified. 9 American submarines had been ordered to redeploy to Korean waters on January 27, just 4 days after Pueblo's capture. Nuclear attack boats and diesel-electric boats. Their missions were varied but urgent. Some conducted photographic reconnaissance of North Korean naval facilities and coastal defenses. Others established defensive screens around American carriers, positioned to intercept any North Korean surface or submarine threat. Several boats conducted offensive intelligence operations, trailing Soviet submarines that were monitoring American forces. USS Segundo, a diesel-electric submarine of the Guppy 2A class, had been operating near Wonsan when Pueblo was seized. Her mission parameters immediately changed. She was ordered to conduct surveillance operations directly off the North Korean port where Pueblo was being held. The objective was intelligence collection, monitoring North Korean naval activity and radio communications. But the risk was enormous. Wonsan harbor was shallow, heavily patrolled, acoustically challenging. North Korean anti-submarine forces were on high alert. Any American submarine detected in those waters would face the same fate as Pueblo, or worse. On January 23, the same day Pueblo was captured, Segundo was operating submerged off Wonsan when North Korean patrol craft detected her presence. Multiple vessels converged on her position. Depth charges began detonating. The crew could hear them through the hull, distant concussions that sent shockwaves through the water, rattling equipment, testing nerves. Commander Edward Rosenberg ordered his boat to the bottom. Segundo settled on the seafloor in approximately 200 feet of water, lying silent, engines minimal, crew barely breathing. For hours, depth charges exploded overhead. The North Koreans were methodically prosecuting the contact, attempting to force the submarine to the surface or destroy it outright. The crew faced a situation submariners train for, but pray never to experience. Lying on the bottom conserves battery power and reduces noise, but it also means you cannot maneuver. You are a stationary target. If the enemy drops ordnance directly on your position, you have no evasive options. Segundo's crew endured this for an extended period. Battery power dwindled. The air quality deteriorated as carbon dioxide built up and oxygen levels dropped. Men grew lethargic, struggling to stay alert. Machinists mate Russ Norrigan later described the experience as nearly running out of air entirely. The crew barely escaped with their lives. Eventually, the North Korean anti-submarine forces lost contact or concluded the submarine had been destroyed or driven away. Segundo crept off the bottom and withdrew from the area at ultra-quiet speed, every man aware that detection meant capture or death. The boat departed Korean waters and headed for safer operating areas. The mission had failed, but the crew had survived. The incident was classified at the highest levels. Decades would pass before crew members felt able to discuss what had happened off Wonsan on the day Pueblo was seized. USS Swordfish, a nuclear attack submarine, arrived in the Sea of Japan approximately 10 days after Pueblo's capture. Her deployment may have been intended to compensate for Segundo's withdrawal or to confront the growing Soviet submarine presence. By early February, at least 2 Soviet submarines were operating in the Sea of Japan, conducting surveillance of American carrier operations and tracking American submarines. The underwater environment had become extraordinarily complex. American boats were trailing Soviet boats. Soviet boats were trailing American boats. North Korean anti-submarine forces were prosecuting any contact detected in their coastal waters. The potential for catastrophic miscalculation was profound. Swordfish conducted her mission for several weeks, operating in frigid northern waters where sea ice drifted south from the Arctic. In early March, disaster struck. Swordfish collided with a massive block of ice. The impact bent her periscope mast back at a 45-degree angle, damaging critical sensors and rendering the submarine incapable of effective surveillance. Commander Justin Ratliff had no choice but to withdraw from the operational area and head for Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan for emergency repairs. The damage required 10 days of work, but Swordfish's arrival created a problem. She had been on a classified special operation. All submarines conducting sensitive missions maintained strict operational security. Their movements, their areas of operation, their objectives, all classified. The Japanese press, however, noticed a damaged American submarine arriving on the surface in broad daylight, an unusual sight. Reporters requested explanation. The United States Navy, unable to reveal Swordfish's actual mission, provided a cover story. The submarine had come to Yokosuka for rest and recreation, much-needed R&R for the crew. A photograph of Swordfish with her bent mast appeared in a Japanese newspaper on March 17th. Soviet intelligence officers in Tokyo saw the image and conducted analysis. Approximately 1 week earlier, their Gulf-class ballistic missile submarine, K-129, had disappeared somewhere in the Pacific. 98 men lost. The Soviet Navy had conducted a massive search and rescue operation, deploying dozens of aircraft, surface ships, and submarines across thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing. Now, a damaged American attack submarine appeared in Japan with a bent mast and a suspicious cover story. Had Swordfish deliberately rammed K-129? Admiral Victor de Gallo, commander of K-129's division, became convinced Swordfish was responsible. He would go to his grave believing it. Soviet naval intelligence analyzed the timeline. K-129 had failed to make her scheduled transmission on March 8th. Swordfish arrived in Yokosuka on March 17th with damage. A Soviet intelligence gathering ship had reportedly intercepted communications indicating Swordfish was returning home after an accident at sea. The circumstantial evidence seemed compelling. When Soviet authorities confronted American officials, the Pentagon responded that Swordfish had been approximately 2,000 miles from where K-129 sank. No mention was made of the submarine's classified Pueblo-related mission. The truth was more prosaic, but equally revealing of the dangers inherent in the post-Pueblo environment. K-129 had not been rammed. She had suffered a catastrophic internal failure, most likely related to her missile systems or high-pressure air systems. But the Soviet belief that an American submarine had attacked their boat reflected how fragile the underwater rules of engagement had become. If you are enjoying this investigation into history's hidden conflicts, please verify your subscription to the channel Cold War Chronicles. We declassify the past to understand the present. The perception of threat was as dangerous as actual threat. Soviet naval commanders, already on high alert due to the Pueblo crisis and the massive American naval presence in the Sea of Japan, interpreted ambiguous events through a lens of suspicion and paranoia. An American submarine with collision damage must have collided with something. A missing Soviet submarine and a damaged American submarine in the same general time frame must be connected. The logic was flawed, but the underlying anxiety was real. The post-Pueblo environment had created conditions where miscalculation was not just possible, but probable. The United States would later attempt to recover K-129 through Project Azorian, one of the most audacious intelligence operations of the Cold War. The CIA commissioned construction of a 600-foot ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, ostensibly for deep-sea mining research. In reality, the vessel was designed to raise a Soviet submarine from more than 3 miles below the ocean surface. The operation succeeded in recovering a portion of the submarine in 1974, providing intelligence on Soviet ballistic missile design and construction. But in 1968, K-129's loss simply added another layer of tension to an already volatile situation. Throughout 1968, negotiations for Pueblo's crew continued at Panmunjom, the joint security area along the Korean demilitarized zone. The talks were frustrating, often bizarre. North Korean negotiators arrived with prepared responses written on index cards. If an American proposal did not match one of their pre-approved cards, they would deliver an entirely nonsensical response and then request the next meeting to formulate an answer. Nothing happened quickly. Nothing happened without approval from Pyongyang. The negotiating style was deliberately obtuse, designed to extract maximum concessions while maintaining absolute control over the process. North Korea demanded what became known as the 3 A's: admission of wrongdoing, apology for the intrusion, assurance it would never happen again. The United States refused, admitting to violating territorial waters when Pueblo had been in international waters would establish a false precedent. It would legitimize North Korea's aggression and undermine American rights to conduct intelligence operations in international waters worldwide. The impasse continued for months. Meanwhile, Pueblo's crew suffered. The diplomatic breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The wife of one of the American negotiators suggested a solution. Sign the North Korean document, but immediately repudiate it. Make clear before signing that the signature is coerced, forced solely to secure the crew's release, and represents no admission of guilt. North Korea could claim victory. The United States could maintain its legal position. Face could be saved on both sides. On December 23, 1968, exactly 11 months after Pueblo's capture, Major General Gilbert Woodward, the senior American negotiator, signed the North Korean document. But first, he read a statement into the record. He declared that the document had been drafted by North Korea. He stated explicitly that he was signing only to free the crew, and for no other reason. The admission, apology, and assurance were meaningless. North Korean officials accepted this transparent fiction. Perhaps they genuinely believed their propaganda had won. Perhaps they simply wanted the crisis to end. Perhaps they had extracted what they needed: technology, intelligence, and a demonstration that American vessels could be captured without triggering war. One by one, led by Commander Booker, 81 surviving crew members walked across the bridge of no return at Panmunjom. They stepped from North Korean territory into South Korean territory, from captivity into freedom. They were gaunt, some still bearing injuries from months of abuse. But they were alive. They were home. Behind them in Wonsan Harbor, USS Pueblo remained. North Korea refused to return the ship. Decades later, it still sits in Pyongyang, a museum exhibit showcasing North Korean military prowess and American humiliation. The crew's return sparked controversy in the United States. Public opinion divided sharply. Many Americans argued that Pueblo should have resisted capture, fighting until sunk rather than surrendering. They claimed Commander Booker violated his duty by allowing the ship to be taken intact. Admiral Daniel Gallery, a prominent naval figure, published scathing criticism of Booker, the crew, and the general public for what he perceived as cowardice and failure. A naval court of inquiry convened in January 1969 to investigate Booker's actions and the crew's conduct during captivity. The inquiry recommended that Booker and one of his officers face court-martial for permitting their ship to be searched and for inadequately destroying classified material before capture. Secretary of the Navy John Chafee reviewed the findings. He rejected the court-martial recommendation. These men had suffered enough. They had endured torture, forced confessions, and nearly a year of imprisonment. Prosecuting them would serve no purpose. Chafee's decision was controversial, but it was final. Booker and his crew would not face military justice. They had paid a price beyond what any peacetime sailors should be asked to endure. The Pueblo incident fundamentally altered American intelligence operations worldwide. USS Banner continued her missions in 1968, but she was the last signals intelligence ship to operate under the Aegir program without significant modification. The vulnerability of slow, lightly armed vessels conducting solo intelligence missions had been proven catastrophically. Future operations would require destroyer escorts, fighter cover, and explicit rules of engagement authorizing the use of force to prevent capture. The invisible rules had changed. The incident also had profound implications for submarine operations. If surface intelligence ships could be seized at gunpoint, what prevented similar attempts against submarines? The answer was depth. A submarine submerged in international waters could not be easily captured, but it could be detected, it could be harassed, it could be attacked with depth charges or torpedoes. The post-Pueblo environment created new dangers for submariners conducting surveillance missions. Soviet and North Korean anti-submarine forces had been emboldened. They knew the United States would not automatically retaliate with overwhelming force. The threshold for confrontation had been tested and found to be higher than previously believed. The Soviet Union's response to the Pueblo crisis revealed their calculations about American resolve. They increased military and economic support to North Korea, but they explicitly refused to support renewed hostilities. Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev made clear in meetings with North Korean officials that the Soviet Union would not go to war with the United States over Korea. The 1961 Mutual Defense Treaty between the Soviet Union and North Korea theoretically obligated Soviet intervention if North Korea was attacked. But Brezhnev indicated that treaty would be ignored rather than risk general war. The message was clear. The Soviet Union would exploit American hesitation. They would support proxies who tested American limits, but they would not cross the threshold into direct conflict. This pattern would repeat. Just over a year later, on April 15, 1969, a United States Navy EC-121 reconnaissance aircraft was shot down by North Korean fighters over the Sea of Japan. 31 American servicemen died. The aircraft had been conducting signals intelligence collection in international airspace, the same mission Pueblo had been performing in international waters. Once again, North Korea attacked an American intelligence platform. Once again, the United States responded with condemnation and military posturing, but not direct retaliation. The precedent held. Intelligence gathering near communist territory carried risks that included potential combat, and the United States would not automatically respond to those attacks with overwhelming force. The Pueblo incident also highlighted dangerous ambiguities in the rules governing peacetime military operations. What constituted international waters? Different nations claimed different territorial limits. North Korea claimed 12 nautical miles. The United States recognized 3 nautical miles. Pueblo had been operating well beyond 3 miles from shore, but North Korea claimed she had violated territorial waters. Without clear international consensus on maritime boundaries, every intelligence collection mission near foreign coastlines carried the risk of incident. The communications failures that delayed warning orders to Pueblo and USS Liberty revealed systematic problems in the military's command structure. Both ships had received orders to withdraw from their operational areas hours before they were attacked. In Liberty's case, the order was issued on June 8th at 1:10 in the morning Zulu time, over 14 hours before the Israeli attack commenced. Due to message routing problems, high-priority unrelated traffic, and a shortage of qualified radiomen, the withdrawal order was not transmitted on the frequency Liberty monitored until 3:25 p.m. Zulu, several hours after the attack ended. In Pueblo's case, similar communication breakdowns meant warning messages arrived too late, or not at all. If this investigation into the dangerous aftermath of USS Pueblo has moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Cold War Chronicles, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story from the invisible war. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, or if you or your family members served aboard submarines during the Cold War. Your stories and memories are part of preserving this history. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps these forgotten stories reach more people who need to hear them. You are part of ensuring these heroes and their sacrifices are not forgotten. The submarine operations conducted during and after the Pueblo crisis demonstrated the extreme complexity of underwater intelligence gathering. American attack submarines trailed Soviet ballistic missile boats at ranges measured in hundreds of yards. They recorded propeller noise, analyzed reactor signatures, photographed hull configurations through periscopes. Soviet submarines conducted identical missions against American vessels. Both sides accepted collision risks as part of the operational reality. In June 1970, USS Tautog collided with a Soviet Echo-2 class submarine in the Bering Sea. The Soviet boat surfaced, severely damaged, and eventually sank while attempting to reach port. In November 1969, USS Gato collided with Soviet submarine K-19, the infamous vessel that had suffered a catastrophic reactor accident in 1961. These collisions were not deliberate attacks. They were the inevitable consequence of submarines operating at dangerously close ranges in hostile environments. But the fear remained. What if a Soviet commander, emboldened by the Pueblo precedent, decided to forcibly drive away an American submarine using weapons rather than maneuvers? What if depth charges were dropped not as warning shots, but as genuine attacks? What if a trailing submarine was rammed deliberately rather than accidentally? The scenarios were nightmarish. Nuclear-powered attack submarines are not fragile, but they are not invulnerable. A torpedo hit would likely be fatal. Even a depth charge near miss could cause catastrophic damage to critical systems. And once violence began, escalation could be uncontrollable. The underwater rules of engagement that emerged from this period were never written down. They existed as operational doctrine passed through training, institutional memory, and hard experience. Follow as close as skill allows. Collect every piece of intelligence possible. But do not fire unless fired upon. Do not attack unless attacked. Maintain plausible deniability for collisions. Report incidents through classified channels. The game was dangerous, but it had limits. Those limits prevented the Cold War from becoming a shooting war beneath the waves. The broader lesson of the Pueblo crisis was that deterrence only works when both sides believe the other will respond proportionately to provocation. North Korea attacked Pueblo because they calculated, correctly, that the United States would not retaliate militarily during a period of acute crisis in Vietnam. The Soviet Union supported North Korea because they calculated, correctly, that American restraint would prevent direct superpower confrontation, and American commanders conducting intelligence operations worldwide understood that their missions now carried risks that extended beyond detection and harassment to potential capture or destruction. The men of USS Pueblo paid the price for these calculations. They spent 11 months in captivity. They were beaten, starved, forced to sign confessions they did not believe. They returned home to find their sacrifice questioned and their conduct investigated. Commander Lloyd Bucker would spend years defending his decisions, explaining that resistance would have meant death for his crew, that fighting a minimally armed intelligence ship against North Korean gunboats, an aircraft was not courage, but suicide. Some understood. Others never would. The submarine crews who operated in the aftermath of Pueblo's capture carried a different burden. They knew that routine intelligence missions could escalate into combat without warning. They understood that if detected in hostile waters, they might face depth charges or torpedoes. They accepted that collision with a Soviet submarine was a real possibility every time they closed to surveillance range. And they knew that if something went wrong, if their boat was damaged, if crew members were killed, if classified equipment was captured, the public would likely never know. Their missions were too sensitive, their operations too classified. They would be remembered, if at all, in redacted documents released decades after the events described within them. This was the reality of Cold War submarine espionage in the years following January 1968. The invisible war beneath the waves continued. American and Soviet submarines stalked each other through the Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic, and Mediterranean. They recorded intelligence, they tested capabilities, they pushed limits, and occasionally they collided. But the violence remained contained. The rules, though unwritten and constantly tested, held. USS Pueblo sits in Pyongyang today, a museum ship maintained by North Korea as proof of victory over American imperialism. Tourists can tour the vessel, see the cramped quarters where crew members worked, examine the communications equipment that was supposed to be destroyed but was captured intact. North Korean guides tell the official story. American spies violating sovereign territory. Brave North Korean sailors capturing the intruders. Imperialist America forced to apologize. The narrative is fiction, but the ship is real. For the men who sailed aboard her, for the submariners who operated in the dangerous months and years that followed, for the intelligence professionals who understood what Pueblo's capture meant for operations worldwide, the ship represents something different. It represents the moment when the invisible rules of the Cold War were tested to destruction, the moment when deterrence failed, the moment when peacetime intelligence operations became something more dangerous, more violent, more unpredictable. The crew of USS Pueblo were released on December 23, 1968. They walked across a bridge. They came home. But they left behind more than a ship. They left behind the certainty that American intelligence platforms operating in international waters were protected by international law and the implicit threat of retaliation. That certainty died in the waters off Wonsan on January 23, 1968. And the submarine crews, the intelligence ship sailors, the reconnaissance aircraft pilots who continued those missions afterward, they all understood that the rules had changed. The game had become more dangerous. And the next incident might not end with prisoners walking across a bridge. It might end with wreckage on the ocean floor and families receiving telegrams expressing the Navy's deepest regrets. This is Cold War Chronicles. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the invisible war, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have only just scratched the surface of the secrets buried beneath the ice. Thank you for ensuring Commander Buka, his crew, and the submarine sailors who continued surveillance missions despite the escalating dangers are not forgotten. Their service in the shadow of Pueblo's capture was the definition of courage under impossible circumstances. Until next time, remember that beneath the surface of history's most dangerous confrontation, men operated in darkness, gathering intelligence that kept the peace even as they risked their lives in the gathering storm.